Hi, this is Sonia on Politalks. I'm here with Dr. Shauna Brail from the Urban Studies program in Innis College, and we're going to talk about her research in Regent Park. Could you tell us a bit about that?
So I'm doing some work in Regent Park looking at community engagement and leadership in the neighborhood, particularly related to the revitalization and transformation of the community, which, as I'm sure you're aware, is the largest public housing development in all of Canada. And it's undergoing a massive rebuilding and transformation, which began in 2005 and is expected to last for probably, it will take at least about 20 years. There's a lot of interest in what happens in Regent Park and in the future of Regent Park as a neighborhood, both from a physical perspective but also from a social perspective. And based on the fact that it is transitioning from a exclusively low-income community to a mixed-income community of low-income and largely middle-income households, I'm really interested in learning more about how the community is engaged in the process of transformation and in how community leadership is taking shape to help people communicate and work together, and what kinds of interactions will result, and whether the sort of building of community and leadership will help in transitioning from a low-income community to a mixed-income community.
Are you finding that the revitalization is successful in its goal to engage the community, including both the condo residents and the lower-income residents?
I would say that definitely there are some successes. I don't think it's already a uniform success. I think that would be too strong of a term. I think that I know that the community has been engaged in the redevelopment process and in the planning process from the outset. So in 1995, it was actually a group of community members that initiated a meeting with planners and developers and Toronto Community Housing around ways in which they could help to improve the neighborhood, including focusing on rebuilding. Community and particular residents of Regent Park have been involved and engaged since the beginning of the process. However, parts of the process have been complicated, and when the developer was brought in, and when the province and the city were engaging in a lot of the decision making, there were many times when residents felt that they were not involved or they were not consulted. There are some parts of the process that are dictated according to municipal bylaws around public consultation. There are also many organizations in Regent Park that have worked with residents to help them engage and be involved. I do think that there has been quite a bit of leadership built out of the process, but I also believe that there are still improvements that could be made.
And so what are some of the improvements that you think could be made?
Well, through our research, we identified three main areas in which we felt there were both strengths and weaknesses. So the first was around institutional memory and how people understand and remember the process of transformation from the 1995 outset. There are people living in the community today who were either unaware or unfamiliar with the notion that residents have been involved in the redevelopment process. To some extent, there's been a lack of information sharing. And this is on the part of both the City of Toronto and Toronto Community Housing, but also on the part of the residents. And I think that everybody involved needs to work that much harder to keep track of records, to keep track of meetings, to share information. And also it's incumbent on people to find that information, to look for it and to understand it in order to be able to participate. The second area that we're focusing on relates to leadership in the community. And in terms of leadership, we have found that there are a huge number of organizations in Regent Park Focus being one of them, but hundreds of organizations that work with residents and also are places where residents are leaders and employed or volunteers at these organizations have helped to build leadership capacity within the neighborhood. And again, there are places of opportunity for continuing to engage and also for continuing to train leaders. One of the things that the University of Toronto has is a partnership with the Learning Centre, an adult learning centre. It's now the TD Centre of Learning in Regent Park. And we run a lecture series there called Ask a Prof. And part of what we've done with some of our research results is bring the results to the community in a public lecture series to talk about skills and resources that we can bring from U of T to the community. And so most recently, we had a session on program evaluation with 2 researchers from the Dalla School of Public Health at the University of Toronto. And actually, as a result of that session, those researchers have just very recently offered to run a 6 to 8 week session at the Learning Center focused on community program evaluation, which will be targeted to residents as participants. It will be offered free of charge, and it will, again, help to focus on building leadership skills. I guess the third area that we focused on is mentorship. And what we learned through our interviews is that residents of Regent Park have built these leadership skills through attending meetings, through sitting on committees, through participating in events, participating in planning activities, etc. And we find that residents are acting in a mentorship capacity to either to youth or to newcomers or to others who are interested in getting involved. There is no formalization of a mentorship program, and that's something that we think might be useful to provide both some structure and also some additional skills to both mentors and mentees. But those are 3 areas that we are working on. So it's institutional memory, leadership, and mentorship.
And just in regards to leadership, that's really excellent about the program evaluation, how that's going to happen. But also, what are some of the difficulties that social housing residents would face when they're trying to pursue leadership roles in the community?
So I guess there are a number of challenges that could be faced. The first one that comes to mind might be a language barrier. I think that there are something like 70 unique languages spoken in Regent Park. It's either 70 or 90. I know that at different events there are translators brought in to help to translate into other languages. But this can, a language barrier can cause a communication challenge for potential leaders. There are some resources to assist with this, but again, it can be a challenge. Other challenges to leadership have to do with having voices heard. And there's often the perception, and sometimes it is a reality, and sometimes it is a misunderstanding, that social housing residents' voices are not as powerful as others' voices, particularly others working as professionals or others with different kinds of experiences. And this can be a real challenge and something I think that residents have learned both as a result of working with others whom they trust and respect from the community, and also as a result of having experience in some leadership positions, that they are able to learn and gain knowledge and gain sort of strategies for ensuring that their voices are heard loudly, which they deserve to be.
Just in your experience with leaders in the community, what would you say some of their personal strengths are, tend to be?
Well, I would say probably the most important strength is just a sense of persistence and engagement and interest. One of the benefits of living in Regent Park, particularly in some of the social housing and in social housing that had become really quite dilapidated, and is the former housing that still exists is very dilapidated in state, is that it's possible to imagine better outcomes and better opportunities. And I think that's what we see in some of the newer buildings and the newer facilities, like the Cultural Center and the Aquatic Center and the upcoming Community Center. And one of the things that I think has happened is that residents have thought of and believed in ways of addressing inequalities that others might not consider. So I'm thinking particularly of the Aquatic Center. The Aquatic Center is a City of Toronto community facility, and typically City of Toronto community facilities are not built, even though they're built within a community, they're built for all City of Toronto residents. And so when it comes time to registering for programs, residents of the City of Toronto at large all have equal access to these programs. Many residents of different neighborhoods will just assume or take for granted that that's simply how it works, and either you are first in line or first on the internet or first on the phone and you get that spot for that coveted swimming class, or you slept in or you didn't know and it's too late. And something that's happened in Regent Park is that residents have advocated both to the city and to other organizations that they actually deserve additional reserved spaces in the Aquatic Center. And I think this is a really important win for the community, and it's a really great way of thinking outside of what is traditionally possible in terms of getting access, in terms of creating leadership, and also in terms of creating greater opportunity in a community that has been typically disregarded and neglected from a physical perspective.
And how do you suggest that leaders would begin a mentorship program? Do you think that would be something that should be done through like the city or more community organization led?
That's a great question. I don't know that I have the answer for how. I think there are some possibilities. First of all, the Toronto Region Immigrant and Employment Council TRIAC runs a mentorship program which actually connects recent immigrants with existing mentors that are in the system who are professionals. And this program partners people so that the idea is not that the mentors help them find a job. The idea is that the mentors help connect them to their networks. And this can be a very successful way of mentoring. So it's something that they might look at other models. I don't think it should be something started from scratch, but looking at other models. There is a huge wealth of resources in Regent Park. At one of our Ask a Prof sessions, we had a collaboration between Regent Park and some communities, both Jane and Finch and Scarborough, and the representatives from those communities all talked about how they envied the access to resources in Regent Park. Having said that, it doesn't mean that there aren't other improvements that can be made, and one of those could be a mentorship program. Again, I think it would be working with existing resources, not necessarily something that the City of Toronto should run, but something that the community could take the lead on in working with what's already here in the neighborhood.
Okay, and how do you suggest that youth in Regent Park should become community leaders, or what kind of steps they could take for that?
You know, when they first started the revitalization process and the consultation process around revitalization, youth, I don't think was a very big topic of concern. And youth have come out as a much more significant, important area of concern because, one, there are a lot of youth living in the community, and their future is the future of the city and of Regent Park. And so there have been programs. I know that Regent Park Film Festival has a program where they engage youth with thinking about the changes that are taking place in their neighborhood. I know that there are some poets and other arts activities in the neighborhood that have helped to build youth leadership. The City of Toronto has a youth council, which could also work with youth in the neighborhood. And I think that we need to look at even other more creative ways and engaging in innovative ways of working with youth. I think it's really important to begin engaging youth more.
And just to go back to institutional memory, could you maybe explain more what that would mean and how that would kind of affect opportunities for engagement in the community?
Sure. So when I talk about institutional memory, what I'm really referring to is the history of Regent Park and the changes that have been made and the decision makers who have made those changes. There are many parties involved in the work that's going on in Regent Park, from the City of Toronto, Toronto Community Housing, the Daniels Corporation. Regent Park itself has gone through a number of different neighborhood associations, initiatives, etc. And there have been changes in both people and programming and priorities at all of these organizations throughout the history, even the more recent history of what's happened in Regent Park. So for instance, Toronto Community Housing has had, they're now on their third CEO essentially since the decision to revitalize and redevelop was made. And decisions are made in different ways by different leaders. And sometimes information related to how decisions were made or why decisions were made or when decisions were made can be lost. And so this idea of institutional memory, you know, we spoke to people about the redevelopment, and some people said, I never heard that we initiated this. I thought that it was the city that initiated it, or I thought it was Toronto Community Housing. And so it's really important to have a record and an accurate record, and it might be multiple accurate records, right? Because there are different narratives and different stories associated with the story of Regent Park, but it's really important to collectively gather that material, have it in a place where people can access it, whether that means in a library, perhaps the library in the neighborhood, whether that means it has its own website and an interactive site where people can add material and add ideas. But the idea of institutional memory is that there were decisions that were made and activities that took place, and to lose sight of those activities or those initiatives actually can have a negative implication or negative consequences on future change if we don't take those into account, and at least if we don't understand the context of how those decisions were originally made.
And so I was just wondering about kind of the institutional memory that you've noticed from, say, the Daniels Corporation or TCHC. How do you think that they've gone about sorting out their institutional memory, and do you think that with more research and more advocacy that could actually lead to more information?
I'm not sure that I can comment on that fully.
Yeah.
I am not familiar enough with what TCH has done to keep a track of record keeping. They do have a website, and I know that the website now has good information on it about current day activities. What I don't see on the website is some of the decision-making activities from previous years. And so that's something that organizations can work on. Having said that, organizations are constantly changing their websites, and so it might be an issue related to archiving, keeping track of the records. And that's something that could be worked on at the University of Toronto. The library is actually working to digitize records, and I've asked them to focus a little bit more on digitizing some of the TCH records so that we can keep track of that, and that's something that we can share fairly broadly as well. But I think it's a work in progress. I don't know also whether TCH or the city has identified institutional memory as a problem for them. I just think it's something that we've identified so far as an issue for Regent Park, and that's something that we can help to communicate as we move forward.
I know that there's a lot of information about Regent Park, and there's a lot of studies happening, including your own research. How do you think that this might affect social housing developments that are occurring elsewhere in Canada or around the world?
It is our hope that our research will help to inform decisions that are made. Right now, at the same time as Regent Park is being redeveloped, the city has also begun a process to transform Alexandra Park. Lawrence Heights is about to begin a major transformation. And I once heard the CAO of Toronto Community Housing say that of their 440 sites, 47 of them were being considered for redevelopment. So this is not just a one-off issue, this is a citywide issue. And also, I know from experience in Chicago and in New York and in many other cities around the world, the redevelopment of public housing sites is both an important topic, and it's making a difference in terms of how cities are structured. In the case of Toronto, we are doing things very differently from what has happened, particularly in the United States, with much more of a community focus and much more of a commitment to former residents to replace all housing on site. And yet, still there are things to be learned, and I know that as a result of what Daniels has experienced so far and what the city has experienced so far on TCH in Regent Park, they have already made changes to the plans and the phases for Regent Park. So for instance, there was the plan to build the cultural center wasn't on the original plan, some money became available, and it was decided that that should be built sooner rather than later. And the same thing goes with the aquatic center, that was moved up in the plan in order to help facilitate a sense of community and facilities within the neighborhood. But I do think that there are real opportunities to learn from this experience and translate those into the experience of other neighborhoods, both in the City of Toronto, more broadly across Canada, and internationally as well. We have an opportunity to stand out as a model transformation instead of one that people would not want to replicate.
Yeah, so in terms of just the focus on building community, as you said, how do you think that that's more useful for mixed income developments just throughout the world? How do you think that that would be a better idea than, say, focusing on just where to split people or other elements to focus on that I can't even think of?
So far to date, most research on mixed income communities has shown that they have been not terribly successful at integrating residents from mixed income backgrounds, from different socioeconomic backgrounds. In terms of physical integration, sure, they bring together lower income and middle income residents. But in terms of integrating at a social level, the outcomes so far seem to be that people still tend to lead very separate lives. I do think that in Regent Park there is some promise here. There is an effort underway on the part of a number of different organizations to have community events that can help bring together individuals. There are some efforts underway to bring together representatives from the buildings, both the market-based condominium buildings and also the non-market buildings, to bring together residents. I can say anecdotally that at our Ask a Prof sessions at the TD Centre of Learning, I know that we attract people from both the market and the non-market housing. And even though this might be a superficial way of interacting, even superficial interactions at the outset can help to build more sort of thorough kinds of interactions. The other thing is, and this is really important, a lot of mixed income developments focus on what the market residents can bring to the non-market residents. And I think in order for integration, any kind of integration and any kind of social interaction to actually work, it needs to look at, it needs to say that actually everybody brings something to the table and everybody contributes. And without that, you're not going to have any sense of a real sort of integrated, interactive community.
And how do you think that these mixed income developments and how Toronto is moving forward with that, how do you think that that would kind of impact Canadian social inequality more broadly? I mean, it's a huge question, but
that is a huge question. Look, creating a mixed income community is not necessarily going to create better paying jobs for people who are currently living under very low economic means. It's not necessarily going to improve educational opportunities. It's not necessarily going to improve job opportunities. In Regent Park, there have been commitments to hire people from within the community, both in construction, in the new retail, at the bank, at the grocery store, at the Tim Hortons. But my understanding is that none of those positions are at a management level, and I think we need to think about how to create some of those positions at a management level. But I think that's a very difficult question. It's an important question. It's not clear how long, if a process like that would help address issues related to inequality, it's not clear how long it would take. Is it going to be in the next decade? If it works, would it be in the next 20 or 30 years? How far out in the future do we have to look? I don't know. It's an important question. Toronto has really significant challenges with respect to inequality.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us on Politalks with Dr. Shauna Brail. See you next time.